How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and in a brand new interview between Ryan McCaffery and Todd Howard, we have learned a ton of new Starfield details, and I have to give credit where credit's due. I've always loved when Ryan does interviews because he gets right to the point. He drills exactly what fans are wondering and the questions that fans have about games, and this interview was no different, and thankfully, Todd Howard was pretty honest with the answers that he gave. They went over things like procedural generation, the map size, the way that the cities work, the questing and the character customization, and so much more. I'll try to leave timestamps in the description below to skip around to the bits that you're most interested in, but I highly recommend that you listen to most of this because there's so many things that, there's so many interesting tidbits, and I think a lot of players are going to be relieved about some of the things that Todd had to say. So, without further ado, we'll jump into it the way Ryan did. He did not hold back, right to the point with procedural generation, the thing that most players were curious, worried about, and Todd Howard acknowledged this. He did say that when you announce something like 1,000 planets, fans are going to turn around and go, wait, what did you just say? And they're going to have questions. Now, while Todd did mention that they're going to be doing a deep dive in the future, he made it a point not just once, but multiple times in this interview to state that they're constantly taking a step back and asking themselves, what do we want to do in a game like this? What are the things that we would find fun? And they try to say yes to as much of that as possible. Now, it's worth mentioning that they can't say yes to everything. One thing that was brought up later on in the interview, one such thing that they couldn't say yes to, was seamless ground to air and space to ground flight. So you cannot seamlessly enter the atmosphere of a planet in Starfield. It's been confirmed. He said that it wasn't worth the time that it would take to develop those systems when they could spend it elsewhere. They're constantly thinking, is this fun? Does it add value? And as a player, those are the best words that we can hear, because we constantly, especially when we have a studio that we love so much or a style of game that we love so much, and you start to detract from that and try different things, we start to question, is that worth it? Is that good time that they're spending? And it's nice to know that they're asking the exact same questions internally. On the subject, Todd Howard specifically mentioned that there are basically two separate experiences. You have your experience of the ship and the space stuff and flying around and the combat that's there and the exploration that's there, and then the stuff on the ground. So two separate things. Todd Howard acknowledges that there is a lot of procedural generation, but they've already done that. They've generated landscapes like Skyrim in the past, and then they go across and always work on it and fine-tune and handcraft it from there. But it was interesting that he did say one thing in particular.
And a planet by itself, if you think about it, is sort of, in a game concept, just one planet is infinitely big if you're going to do it in some realistic fashion. So once you're dealing with scale like that in procedural systems, the difference between, say, one planet that has some variation on it and 100 planets or 1,000, but it's actually not that big of a leap, if that makes sense, once you have good systems working for that.
Now, he mentions there's some variation, doing one planet with some variation on it. Is this confirmation in some way that there's multiple biomes per planet? I hope so. It would be a little bit disappointing if every single planet just had one singular biome. It's hinted at a little bit with the heads-up display that we could see during the gameplay, where it does specifically say biomes there, but it's not necessarily confirmed as of yet. And I found this interesting because it does highlight one of the concerns that players had, which is, well, you only have limited resources to work with, so am I going to be seeing the same planets over and over? And Todd in some ways does confirm this. He mentioned specifically ice balls, that there's a lot of ice balls in the world, because quite frankly, it's realistic to have a lot of barren worlds in Starfield, and we've been speculating that most of the planets you come across will probably be these barren, dead, or desolate worlds. That seems to be the case. However, on top of all of the handcrafted content, which we'll start getting into the handcrafted stuff in just a little bit, on top of all of that that's there, you optionally can still choose to say, you know what, I'm gonna go land on this ice ball, I'm gonna build my camp there because I like the landscape, I like the two moons that are setting. Whatever the case might be, you have the option to do that. And it ties back to what we said previously, where they just want to allow players to do the things that they want to do and see if it's fun. So what about the players who want to stick to the handcrafted stuff? What about the players who want to do those things, those traditional Bethesda experiences? Well, Todd's still thinking of you. You have not been forgotten. And this was probably the most relieving part of the interview for me. Todd Howard mentions that they've done more handcrafting in Starfield than they have done in any game ever before. He states specifically that there's over 200,000 lines of dialogue. They're still tweaking it, but that's what it's at right now, which is pretty impressive when you consider the last time we heard about dialogue in Starfield was 150,000 lines. So there's an additional 50,000 lines that have been added since then. He does mention that if you want to stick to the things that you're used to in Bethesda games, the things that you kind of expect from them in the past, you can do just that. You're going to see those things in Starfield. But then there's that whole other part that we mentioned before of having the random planets, and he attributes the experience to being like Daggerfall. For many fans, it's probably an excellent comparison. For me, I'm just happy to know that those things that I want from a Bethesda game are still there, and everything else is just supplemental. We saw similar discussions when it came to the settlement system in Fallout 4, so Bethesda themselves are no strangers to these types of discussions ongoing. Is this worth the time spent? They had faith in the settlement building, they said yes to that question, and it turned out to be now a huge part of their games, and I hope this side of exploration tends to be the same. Next, they dive into ship combat. Is it shallow? Is it this thing that's just tagged on? And Todd Howard says no. When we started discussing Starfield and some of the systems, we're good with the tech that's being used, we're good with the gameplay systems that are used, and they started first on the procedural generation, and then they jumped right onto the space combat, so they always knew that it's something that they wanted to do in this game, and it's inspired by space shooters of the 90s. I think you could look at Wing Commander for that. You could look at FTL, which I called it. I knew those systems were inspired by FTL, and he specifically cites that game. While he doesn't mention other aspects that might have been pulled from FTL, I do hope that this might mean the crew play a larger role than just simply being either aesthetic or just there for some minor functionality, like maybe get a little bit of boost to your hull health, right? In FTL, if you've ever played the game, those crew members actually need to go repair the ship when it's getting damaged, and they do have their own level up and they have their own skills, so I hope some similar functionality is here. I would love to see that level of depth in the ship combat system, but we'll see how it does flesh out. Now, I personally have been wondering exactly what that gravity bar is. Essentially, he clarifies that you can grav jump short distances. It's not just going between system to system. So if you're in combat and you're trying to maneuver a bit, you can make a shorter grav jump, but you need to power those systems up, which I thought was fairly cool. He also describes the pace of the combat, which is fairly slow. If you want an example, you can look at Mech Warrior. I'm not familiar with the title, but he said Mech Warrior is probably a bit slower, but basically the point he was getting across is it's not some twitchy shooter, and you see that in the gameplay, how things are a lot heavier, even the sounds, everything just looks a lot bulkier. So that's kind of the feeling that they're trying to go for. It might be why Heavy 008, if you remember, he said that he wasn't a fan of the ship combat of the game. It didn't feel that great. Maybe he just didn't like that style. Maybe he wanted something sharp and responsive. So there you go. It was just an opinion, which is kind of what I've been trying to get across all along. A couple of really interesting things that I need to make sure I mention. He says you can steal enemy ships. There's dialogue in space. You could visit star stations. There's smuggling. So that Han Solo simulator description was pretty accurate as you go on smuggling runs. There's pirates that attack, and there's going to be more on that later. But a good chunk of gameplay is the ship stuff. So they dedicated a lot of time, a lot of resources to have a well thought out, well fleshed out system for the ship combat. And again, I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy that's not just some tacked on like afterthought, oh, this would be cool, and it didn't get the attention it deserves. And hopefully this alleviates some of you that might have been concerned if you paid attention to the leaks that we got a while back. Another reason why, honestly, I find leaks to be pretty stupid. Very briefly, they went over the character creation. Ryan asked how many backgrounds are there. Todd Howard says, I'm going to get this wrong, but maybe around 20. They are adding and removing them, which is fair. Content is going to keep ebbing and flowing based on what fits, what works, what doesn't. I'm hoping that at least the ones that they showed us on the screen are there. Maybe they're tweaked a little bit. He did say that, yes, some dialogue is worked into it and some other options, which we got an example of during the gameplay showcase, where the UC SysDef character says, oh, you're a diplomat? Well, that's going to work in our favor in some instances, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing here. And then once again, we already knew this if you've been following Starfield, but they do have those step out moments. The beginning of the game starts linearly, so once again, confirming that there's no multiple starts. And that's part of the step out moments. But step out moments, there's a few of them. He says it could be anything from when you first get to space to when you first land on a planet to just seeing a planet for the first time and exploring what's there, right? So multiple step out moments in this game, which is pretty appropriate for a space game. He also echoes something that I was thinking, but I haven't explicitly stated until this point. The reason why I really like the background system so much is because it does help you to kind of define a character a little bit. While you're role-playing as a chef, or you're role-playing as a beast hunter, an industrialist, a homesteader, a gangster, a ronin, what that might mean, a professor. So they have all of these interesting and unique areas that you can choose to start your character as. Of course, again, you're not locked into it, but to just give you a little bit of background for the role-playing part of the game, which they know fans really do enjoy. Now, we just say there's only 4 main cities in the game. We know of Neon, New Atlantis, and Aquila, so there's at least one more for us to get to discover, which is pretty cool. I'm glad that there's still some secrets to uncover. 4 seems a bit small. Now, the cities are infinitely larger. Todd Howard mentions that these cities are larger than New Atlantis in particular, is the biggest city that they've ever built in a game. And it has all the services that you expect in it, but I hope that there are some smaller settlements that you can still visit. I imagine there has to be, right? The same way you're traveling through Skyrim and you have villages like Vorikstead, or it might be like, say, Stone Hills, I think was the name of another small village in the game, right? So I do hope that you get some of those smaller settlements. 4 cities, though, that's a good amount, but it just seems as though if we're talking about a civilization that now controls multiple star systems, there needs to be elements in place to justify how they stay in control of those systems. So again, just because he does mention that there's only 4 major cities doesn't mean there's not more out there, which I suspect is going to be the case. Now, for you lore gurus out there who are interested in the lore of Starfield, he mentions that Constellation is actually the faction that's responsible for piecing together some of these NASA relics that we saw in the in-game trailer. I thought that was pretty interesting. A, that they're collecting it, but B, are they just trying to preserve it because nobody cares anymore? Or is it a matter of Earth is just no longer really a present thing? We know that you can travel to the Sol system in Starfield, where Earth would be located. I imagine you can't land on Earth for some pretty obvious reasons, but I'm curious as to what the in-game lore reason for that is, and on top of that, what happened to civilization that pushed us away from it. Now, if you like handcrafted content like I do, this is probably where some of you will get pretty excited, which is the length of the main quest. And again, Ryan just asking so many incredibly smart questions, right? Just getting the things that we actually really want to know. And Todd Howard states specifically that the main quest in Starfield, while it's still being iterated and still being worked on, and it might go up or down a little bit, who's to say, it's around 20% longer than what we have in past Bethesda games. So if they previously aimed for a 25-hour long main quest line, this one may take around 30 or 40 hours to complete, and that's just the main quest. That doesn't include all the faction questline things that you can do on top of. I am hoping, well, I'm not against the Radiant quest system in Bethesda games. In fact, in the past I've mentioned how I think it can be good if it had further improvement. I'm hoping to see that here to really stretch out the length of some of those things, to add a little bit of padding. I never think a little bit is too big or too bad if it's done properly, that is. So just the main quest alone, 40 hours. You add in all the factions, you add in all the side quests, and then on top of that, you throw in the settlement, the colony building if you want to take part in that, and the optional exploration that you have in the game. It's easily, as we've heard in the past, just the biggest Bethesda game ever made, and it's more and more clear by the day why that is the case. And this was pretty exciting. We knew that Fallout 5 was in the works, but now we have confirmation from Todd Howard, which is going to be exciting for Fallout fans, that it's going to come after the Elder Scrolls 6, which is currently in pre-production. So it's nice to know that we have a timeline of what's coming down the pipeline. Hopefully this means that now that he just admitted it to the whole world, hopefully this means that we won't have to get that small tease and then years of silence before we see the next Fallout game. They could wait to do it the way they traditionally have in the past. He also, what I thought was more interesting, because again, we did know that there's a one-pager for the next Fallout game, was one of the news articles that was spreading way back when. He also said that there's some other projects that they're looking at. I'm not even going to try to guess what they are, because let's just get through Starfield and at least Elder Scrolls 6 before we start talking about that, but Todd Howard does acknowledge that it takes a long time. Like, Starfield 2 might be more than 10 years from now before we see that game. Thankfully, they're not trying to say, all right, we need to do all these things because we're not going to get to Starfield 2 in this amount of time. They're just trying to do what they think right now works. And again, he really reiterates what is fun right now. So that's everything that we learned from the Todd Howard interview. I hope that you guys enjoyed so many juicy details, and thank you to Ryan for making this happen, because I don't know about you guys, I'm feeling a lot more alleviated about some of these things, especially, again, the comment where he says, yes, you can do all those things that you want in a traditional Bethesda experience. That's all there. And my hope in a traditional Bethesda experience, I get those smaller hub worlds, or at least like a map half or a quarter the size of Skyrim's map that you can go around in a dedicated area, not just singular locations on planets as what we've currently seen. So I am hoping to see more thought out locations within planets. We're yet to see if that's the case, but again, they did say they're going to go into more details about both the ship combat and the procedural generation at a later date, and we know they have the time to do that because it's not releasing until mid-2023. So let me know your thoughts. Are you still concerned about the procedural generation, or are you starting to acknowledge, like I am, the initial fears have started to wane away and you're realizing that yes, this can be a very great Bethesda game? Let me know what you're feeling now in the comment section below. And let me know if you could ask Todd Howard a question, what would you want to ask him? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. Thank you guys for continuing to grow the community. We've passed 900 subscribers. It's so exciting. We're well on our way to 1,000, so let's keep that train going, and I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.